big silence. The big silence.
Hello, and welcome back to the Big Silence podcast. So happy you're here. Again, always thank you for joining and sharing and commenting and liking. We at the Big Silence, we are a nonprofit foundation. So anything can help, even donations. We have these with no ads right now. And if you love the podcast, head over to thebigsilence.com/donate. On another note, are you around the Austin, Texas area on October? I was going to say September, wrong month, October 9th. Because if you're here or if you want to fly in and come to wine country and hang out, go over to thebigsilence.com/events and you will see that we are holding a fundraiser at our friend's winery. It is Slate Theory Winery. And if you listen to last week's podcast, I was talking about how Bobby and I just happened to enter this winery and noticed all of the mental health correlation from the names of their wines, from their the statement about why they do their business. And we became friends with the family over conversation and art and wine, of course. So we are doing an event for World Mental Health Awareness Day, which it is October 10th, but the event is on October 9th. It's from 11 to 2 at the winery. Not only the winery, but in the wine cave. So it is going to be music, meditation, wine, all the good stuff. I'll be doing a mental health talk joined by James Kinney, who is, you know the song, The Big Silence, Breathe In, Breathe Out. He'll be performing. And then my friend Amber Valdez is doing a sound bath meditation. And then we're going to hang out, sip some wine, have conversation, and have a damn good time. So I hope that you will join us there. And I love what Slate Theory Winery says about their wines. Fill your head with a full sensory experience that manifests in the form of psychologically stimulating wine. So I hope to see you there. So today's guest is Dr. Julia Britz. I was really excited to have a conversation with her. She's a licensed naturopathic doctor who received her training from Bastyr University in San Diego, specializes in supporting people who are struggling with mental health issues such as anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, and psychiatric medication tapering. So a lot of her clients, she tries to wean off of their pharmaceutical meds and go more homeopathic. So great conversation. We talk about gut health and anxiety. We talk about why she got into this and how she was a lost cause and, was told that she would just have to stay on pharmaceutical medication for her OCD and anxiety for the rest of her life. But amazing woman, so intelligent. I hope you love this conversation and enjoy it. I'll see you later. All right, and welcome to the podcast, Dr. Britz. I'm so excited to have you in for a conversation today.
I'm so excited to be here.
And Dr. Britz just told me she found me, through Tone It Up for many, many years. So that is really exciting. And
I know, I was doing hip raises in my living room, and you guys had a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And you guys were doing hip raises in your living room. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow, that's like OG. Was it on YouTube?
Yeah.
I know Kat and I have been talking. We're like, we should put more content on YouTube again. We're always going back and forth on like what to do next. So if the community's out there, let us know. We're always listening, So the conversation I'm excited to have with you, because you're a neuropathic doctor. And for those of you who don't know, from my story, the short of it is mother was schizophrenic and suffered from depression. She was on meds, off meds. And I went through my own anxiety, 10 years of depression, drug abuse. And I don't know if you know this, Dr. Britz, but I had psoriasis all over my body. And I was living a very unhealthy lifestyle. And I went to, back in the days, this is my early 20s, didn't have insurance. I went to a free clinic in LA. And the doctor was like, are you under a lot of stress? I was like, yeah. And, asking about my nutrition. And she said, I'm not going to prescribe you any prescription drugs. She's like, I'm going to prescribe you yoga and meditation and sunlight. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to do that. And you know what? Yoga, it's how I got back into fitness and yoga, meditation, and some vitamin D. And so, I've used a lot of natural ways of healing and dealing with anxiety and things like that. So I'm excited to hear from you, the expert in this, and everyone out there. I get a lot of messages about how we can do it naturally. But before we get into that, though, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and how you got into this and why.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I love what you said about, that's so rare for a doctor to not do the med thing. So that's actually really cool. And we've all been told at one point, like, eat healthier, and it just goes one after the other because it sounds like nothing after a while. And for me, I was always a pretty healthy eater growing up, and luckily my mom said, if you can't pronounce it, you can't have it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have monosodium glutamate, couldn't pronounce that for a while.
Yeah.
But I had OCD pretty young, and it was pretty classic obsessive compulsive disorder type symptoms. And it got progressively worse until I became totally unfunctional, I would say. By around age 20, I think that's pretty common for a lot of people. They hit college and then things just change. And before you know it, your scale just tips and you just can't deal anymore. And I had some things that I thought were pretty normal to me that I now realize that were part of the anxiety picture I was dealing with. So I had a lot of social anxiety and a lot of depression. Eating disorder stuff started pretty young as well. I just thought I just wasn't hungry,
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty common too. So I had tried a lot of things, and really what moved the dial for me immensely was seeing a naturopathic doctor. And I remember leaving her office with all these supplements going, okay. I said I wasn't going to be my mother with like a wicker basket full of supplements. And now that's exactly what I have downstairs. But but I felt so much better. It was so simple and it happened so quickly. And it was like someone had plugged me back in once we actually dealt with the root cause. And I called her and I said, hey, I want to do whatever you do. How do I do that? And that's what led me into school. And I never really wanted to go into specifically addiction and psychiatric medication discontinuation, but because I wanted to mental health, functional mental health, but I found that it was also intertwined. And so I became super passionate about helping people just get to where I am now. Like, how do you overcome something that people said you can't get better? You need meds. You have to do this. Like, This is the way it is. And how do you get from there to here?
Yeah. You've been told that nothing was going to work except for pharmaceutical therapy.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're like pharmaceutical therapy. Thank you, Emily. I can't pronounce these words all the time either. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to go back for you as a kid, and what did OCD look like for you? And this is for anyone listening that maybe like feels that something might be going on, but they're not sure and there's not a name for it. Like, what did that look like for you?
For me, I was a very like heady little kid, constantly up here thinking, is everybody okay? Is everyone happy? Am I doing the right thing? Is this good enough? And I was very perfectionistic with my homework. So I often didn't turn it in or would turn in very late because I was just doing it over again. I would erase numbers because they weren't written perfectly. And so I don't remember having a ton of concrete obsessions as a kid, as much as I just felt this heightened sense of it has to be exactly right or something bad will happen. I didn't know what the bad meant. I just knew that it was going to be my fault. Mm-hmm. So I think if I look back, I remember I was really, really scared of people. I was dropped off the first day at school and I looked around and I thought, why is everyone so happy? This is literally the worst thing that could ever happen to any of us, because I was just so anxious. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was very picky about my clothing and what I was going to wear. I was very picky about my food. I didn't like feeling a lot of stimulation. So I didn't like food that tasted strong. I didn't like ketchup because everything was just too stimulating and I was just trying to calm myself. I didn't really know that at the time. And then I became a teenager. It became a little bit more classic OCD stuff, where I was tapping the counter and blinking a certain number of times. People often confuse tics with compulsions because they do both have a repetitive nature. And actually my sister, she had more of what we call pure O OCD. So she wasn't compulsing. She had some of the obsessions, which are really intrusive thoughts, but not really compulsing on that one. My obsessions were things like, if I don't do this a certain number of times, my family will die. If I don't go back on the freeway and make sure I did run over somebody for the 20th time, then I probably did run over somebody. And I knew all this was crazy to me, like irrational, but the brain's always trying to logic its way out and think, okay, it's so strong what you're feeling. There has to be a reason. So if you don't figure it out, then obviously there's truth to the obsession. And then it got more into the germs from there. But actually, as a kid, I hated being germy. I hated not washing my hands. I was a compulsive hand washer as a kid.
Yeah. So you mentioned your sister. Is there a family history or some kind of trauma that happened when you were kids that maybe would lead to this? Or have you ever gone back to figure out where it came from?
I know, right? Such a good question. We were all pretty anxious, my siblings and I. My parents divorced when I was little, and I think that does play a role when you kind of experience that sense of loss. But aside from that, I think there was nothing that I could look back and see that was fairly obvious. I think for most of it, if I had to guess, it probably happened before I was age 2. In terms of my parents, I love them so much, but there's a lot of anger there and a little bit of alcohol stuff. And so I think, you grew up and you're kind of used to that. And so you don't really realize that it's maybe not quite soothing, especially if your nature is to be soothed, be more of a sensitive soul.
Yeah. Well, number one, divorce is traumatic for young kids. Absolutely. And I think I have a lot of friends and who haven't processed what it meant to see your parents argue constantly growing up and then separate, and understanding that like every kid who has parents who go through a divorce should definitely work through that trauma, because it is traumatic. I mean, trauma can be anything tiny to something big, depending on who you are and how it affects you. And then, and being in an environment that maybe, because I'm saying this out of my own experience, normalizing your environment, but not realizing how it's affecting your brain. Like growing up with a schizophrenic mother, I was like, it's totally normal that she burns her paintings and doesn't let us watch TV, and that she's saying my friend's parents are part of the Antichrist. I'm like, oh, okay, got it. It's like these things that you just normalize. And even when we grow older, you have to go through the healing part and figuring out what was real, what was not. And, it's all a process. So there's a lot that you witness as a young kid that then, I have a lot of anxiety, and it's gotten worse over the years. And so I want to talk to you because there's this little herb shop down the street in Austin. Yeah.
Yes.
It's so good. I think it's called the Herb Shop. I might be doing it wrong. But they have all the good homeopathic stuff. So I definitely want to get into what you do. And I want also all of your modalities that I've been trying to research, if you can explain them. But I'll let you take the lead on I would like to focus on maybe anxiety to start out with.
Yeah. Well, that's the most common thing. And anxiety to me is a very difficult word for people because we all think of it differently. But I would think of anxiety as stress and fear kind of together. And it's usually very nerve-wracking for people. It usually feels very spiky, intense, and quick. So people feel anxiety and they go, I got to get rid of it right now. And so depression's more slow. It's quieter, softer pressure over long term. So people generally say, if I can get rid of one first, I want the anxiety to go away first. And that's really what anxiety is. ADHD, bipolar, they all have roots with anxiety. And it's something that people it's hard to have a positive relationship with that because there is a normal version of anxiety, which is healthy. And then there's the kind that feels out of our control and feels like it's hurting us. Part of it starts as...
Can you actually explain a little deeper on the healthy anxiety versus the other? Just so someone listening, I'm like, what is healthy anxiety? Because maybe if I knew what healthy anxiety was, then I wouldn't have the bad anxiety because I'd be like, this is just my healthy anxiety.
I know, like the good stuff. And so healthy anxiety is the stuff that keeps you safe. Like when you're about to hit a car and you slam on the brakes really hard and you're like, and you feel all that, that's good. Like that's keeping you out of danger. So when it becomes quote unquote bad, it's when you sort of subconsciously think you're in danger all the time. And so everything becomes a source of threat to you. You're like, I don't want to look at my my bank account right now. And I'm afraid to talk to my boyfriend because I don't want to get into a fight. And then all these things lead to a threatening place of avoidance. And that increases that level of unhealthy anxiety, which is actually not really protecting you. Your brain's trying to protect you in its own way. But unfortunately, it's just taken a left turn doing that. So that's a huge area that I focus on because anxiety is going to lead to dysregulated eating patterns, like eating too much, not eating enough. It's going to lead to poor sleep. So not being able to sleep, waking up at 4 a.m, having vivid dreams or nightmares. It's going to cause elevations in your stress hormones, which we know is directly linked to acne. So it's, anxiety, stress, I think are kind of one at this time.
Yeah. So with anxiety and stress, because I would have psoriasis when I get super stressed out. So I'm going to be asking you, what should I do for what you would recommend for that? And I know a lot of people, even Katrina too, for those listening, co-founder at Tone It Up, she started getting the same kind of reactions too later in life.
Yeah. And it's common. I mean, your skin is one of the first, it's the most important detox organ, well, one of them that we have. And it will tell you what's happening internally. So usually people see me with psoriasis, acne, or anything else. I'm wondering what's happening in the gut, or I'm wondering what's happening with the liver. The skin is just a reflection more than it actually is. I mean, sure, you can get, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So what do you suggest to listeners and your clients as a beginning point? And I know you do online, it's not teledoc. It's
telemedicine.
Telemedicine. Thank you. If I didn't have Emily sitting over here, telemedicine. She says hi.
Hi.
Which I'm totally coming to you. Which I'm totally going to make an appointment with you for telemedicine for all of this stuff for me. But
yeah, girl, do it.
What would you recommend where people can begin?
Okay, so the first thing is always going to be being very honest with yourself, and I think that's actually harder in a way, for men to do. It's because for a lot of reasons, but usually for women, they can recognize like, I don't feel good. They're a little more open about it. They'll talk to their friends and they'll kind of want to play around with what's actually happening. Men tend to, internalize it a little bit more. Don't always feel worthy of help. Can feel guilty because maybe it's not so bad. They don't want to seek it out right away. So it's a different way they kind of feel that. So for people that are just starting to wonder if they have an unhealthy relationship with anxiety and it's interfering with their life, that's where I say it's important to talk to somebody that you trust. And it can be anybody, just like to be a friend or your whatever, doesn't matter. And it doesn't have to be so bad for therapy. Like you can have barely any issue and go to therapy. Like it's totally fine, so you don't have to be the worst off ever to seek help. You're worthy of help no matter where you're at is kind of the point. And if therapy is just not doable, if it's not affordable, if whatever's not going to happen, therapy workbooks are actually so much better than they ever were. And so those can be really nice. There's some really great ones out there. One I really like in particular is Get Out of Your Life, or Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Stephen Hayes. He was the creator of ACT therapy. And it's a very, very gentle book. Louise Hay has written so many good books. I mean, she did when she was alive. On self-love, which is a great place to start with all that. And if you really, really don't know, this is where it's important to just write down, just free write journal. Don't let anybody see it. Just kind of get it on paper and get a sense of what's actually stirring up with you. And just kind of take it step by step and then go from there and see what you want to look down toward. I always tell people medications can be very helpful, but I don't always like them as a first line treatment. There's no such thing as a magic pill ever. So I always encourage people, like, take your time, see what feels right to you, look for all your options, and then decide what's the most appropriate thing so you feel good about the treatment that you're going to do.
Yeah. Can we go back? I think you said it was Stephen Hayes who did ACT, which is acceptance commitment therapy. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because did you do that as part of your healing process?
I did. And it's because I wasn't super excited about CBT, which is cognitive behavioral. And that was based on Aaron Beck's work. And it was this idea of if you can sort of reorganize the thoughts, then you'll be less anxious, which, yes, that's absolutely valid. But my OCD was so severe, I didn't see how that was really going to stop things that were happening. Both therapies can involve ERP, which is exposure response therapy, where you kind of just face your phobia a little bit. But acceptance and commitment had a hippie sort of basis to it. It was a little more Eastern, like, just accept your thoughts. It's all going to be all right, which I kind of liked. And the success rate in literature was the same. So I was more on board with, okay, I just don't believe this can really go away. I don't care if I'm behaviorally weird, walking upstairs backwards, etc. As long as the thoughts are not so horrifying to me, if I can learn to live in harmony with that, I would rather do that. It was just an easier thing for me to grasp on. So I did that for about a year, and it was very helpful. I think it got me down symptomatically by like 25%. So it took the edge off, and it gave me a lot of tools that I still use now when I'm having like an off day.
Yeah. Can you share any of those tools?
Of course I can. So I'm a big analogy person, and a lot of people are very visual with anxiety because we're always up here. So one little trick he had me do was close my eyes, and I was actually too scared to close my eyes at the time. So I looked around, and he said, when a negative thought or an intrusive thought comes in your brain, like, I can't do this, or I'm going to hurt somebody, or I can't handle this, whatever it is, imagine a river. And imagine that thought written on a little maple leaf, just falls into the river, and recognize it, acknowledge that it's there, see it, give it attention, it wants attention, and then watch it flow down the river and go away.
Yeah. It's a bit like meditation. Actually, in the Tone It Up app, I have, I think there's a meditation in there about having the thoughts and just letting it float away and like see it, recognize it, accept it, realize it's just a thought, and let it drift away. And
I love that. Isn't it nice? We're even just doing it right now. We're like, that's so nice.
And then you're like,
because thoughts never kill you.
Yeah. And other things too, like just simple things of like, that is just a thought. It is not reality. It is not truth, because your thoughts can become your truth, as you know. And so, just letting those thoughts come. And even, do you have a meditation practice?
Not really. I had a really hard time with meditation because for me, the quiet space was where my trauma stuff was coming out. So I couldn't do yoga. I couldn't do meditation. The relaxation actually caused me to have these depersonalization episodes, which is where you kind of feel like you're walking around on a set. Like nothing looks real. Everything looks fake. People don't look real. You can't recognize, like, I couldn't tell if people looking at me or through me. Those little things you notice about being a person just kind of go out the window, and everything just feels like a dream. So that would happen whenever I try to meditate. So it took me a long time to feel kind of safe and even now I have to generally hold something and fidget. Because the quiet thing is just a little too hard still. So, but as you know, it's constantly peeling back the onion.
Yeah.
Trauma work doesn't really stop with one treatment. You got to kind of keep working at it.
It will forever be ingrained in the cells of our body. But again, you just keep working at it. You do your best. Some days are good. Some days are not. And we have the tools, and it's okay if some days you don't do those tools that make you feel good. But I think just, again, recognizing it, and I get better at that now. I'm like, this is anxiety coming on. I see you. I hear you. I'm going to breathe through you and say you are not real. And something that, can pull you out of it. One of the interesting modalities that you use is botanical medicine. And we're not talking ayahuasca, everyone.
No.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I love botanical medicine, which is, I use mostly European herbals more than Chinese medicine, which is an entirely different school of thought, how that works. It's fascinating, and I wish I knew it. I just don't. I do micronutrient therapies as well, and they're a little bit different. So I think we all have a tendency to think of pharmacological therapies, supplements, and herbs as kind of the same thing. What works good for what symptom? In reality, they're all very different. So with pharmacology, we're actually looking to, it's called subtractive medicine. We're looking to inhibit a function, prevent an enzyme, or we're trying to stop something from working, which will inherently basically slow down some effect in the body. And that can potentially help pathology, like an antibiotic. If you're actually killing that, then sure. Now, when it comes to supplements, there's no supplement that's technically good for anxiety because, for example, if somebody had very low B12 levels and we just said, oh, you have anxiety, we should try 5-HTP. That's really good for your serotonin. It's not going to do anything to correct the B12. So then they go, I took it, didn't help. Supplements don't work. Well, it's like, yeah, you have to know what you're treating because they're not trying to inhibit your symptoms or lessen your symptoms. It's trying to correct the nutrient imbalance, which would resolve the symptom indirectly. Now, herbs are even more different. So herbs are probably more similar to pharmacology in that they're not necessarily correcting a nutrient imbalance per se. A lot of them are working on a system to reduce symptoms, but a lot of them have healing properties as well. So some of them are antimicrobial, some of them do reduce inflammation. So it's kind of a blend of the two worlds, which is why I like them so much. I think that's how I would describe the three.
Yeah. And then so if a client comes to you, like, what is the process? I'm just interested because I'm not on any medications for anything. So I always am like looking for a natural way. Or I even went to my doctor and did blood work a few weeks ago. And like, I have high cholesterol and it runs in my family. My dad is like the healthiest person in the whole wide world or high cholesterol for my age. And I was like, what? So I'm like, okay, cut out your fried food. She's like, I can put you on high blood or cholesterol medication. I was like, no. And I'm like, let me look at what I'm putting in my body, what I'm doing, making sure I'm working out. I was like, absolutely not. But of course, that's when you go to a doctor and they're like, we can put you on this, and this, and you're good. So like going to someone like you, like, what is that process?
Yeah. And it's so true. And, and cholesterol, I just want to say, cholesterol is a really good thing. Like we demonize it, but we also demonize lots of things in our body that are very good things. And without cholesterol, we don't make hormones. Without hormones, we have terrible PMS and no sex drive and all kinds of awful things. So, and the way I would look at cholesterol may not be the way that a more traditionally trained doctor might look at it. I'm more curious on the ratios and maybe some of the lipoproteins. So I want more of a complex picture than just like total triglycerides.
Yeah.
It's like kind of boring. So what I would want to do typically when I see people is I have an initial appointment. That's where like, just tell me your story, just go hit the play button. They talk, and I listen till they're done. And that gives me a sense of what's important to them and what's really been on their mind, how long has it been going on? And I'll ask questions too. Some of my questions are a little weirder, like, hey, after you have an orgasm, do you feel tired? Do you feel energetic? Do you cry? What happens? That tells me a lot about their chemistry up here. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to get a sense of the whole body because I don't want to treat like, what disease do you have? I mean, yeah, it's important, but I want to know like what's causing you not to feel your best, and usually people can tell you, they already know. They're like, hey, I really feel like I've got an infection. I really feel this. Like, okay, you live in your body, and that's where I'll typically recommend different nutrients or supplements, herbs from there, and see if we get them out of immediate suffering. And that's based on clinical presentation of what seems pretty obvious to me. Then usually I like to run some blood work too, and then I'll look at that functionally as well because those lab ranges are so old. Like when you look at the lab range for anything like thyroid, cholesterol, that was created around the 1920s when people were shorter, they were leaner. We didn't have all this glyphosate or processed food. And so everything was different. Like you made your own pasta. You didn't buy it in a box, right?
Right.
So those ranges haven't changed in almost 100 years. So to me, it doesn't really make sense because we are all so different. So I am under the school of thought that we have to look at them differently as well. So like I had a kid who she had, it was barely out of range. Like her thyroid level was barely out of range. And she had really bad OCD and depression. And so once we just barely tweaked it, all her anxiety got a lot better. Now, technically, nothing was wrong. She didn't have clinical hypothyroidism, and some of it's very easy. Like I had a kid, his hair was falling out. He wasn't sleeping. He ran thyroid. And it was a little bit out. His doc said, it'll probably go back in on its own, so I didn't like that. And I was like, look, just try changing your diet, X, Y, and Z, and add in, a little more salt And after a week, he's like, my hair's not falling out. So we can do little things that seem so mild, but can make such a huge difference. So I like to focus a lot on that sort of stuff. And some of the big things I see with people are like, hey, you're not drinking enough water. And everybody knows that. And you're not eating enough salt. One of the biggest things in our culture is people don't eat salt. They avoid fat, too much sugar, too much fat.
Yeah. Let's talk about salt a little more because, I think there's a lot of mixed messages like don't have too much salt and then have enough salt. So what is that balance? Because, if you have like high blood pressure, take away your sodium intake. But what are your thoughts on that?
You know what? I'm glad you asked that question, and hang tight because I actually wrote it down yesterday because I was talking to somebody else about this. But there's a huge problem with salts in our culture. The first thing I would say about it is in our culture, America, I mean, they recommend no more than 2.3 grams of sodium a day. So that's not a lot. In most of Europe, it's around 6 grams a day. So it's quite a lot more. I can't find, I'm just going to have to do it from memory. I can do this.
You got it.
I have it. There was 107, this is a meta-analysis they did of 170 clinical studies, which is really impressive. They found that when they did sodium restriction on people with normal blood pressure, it only reduced it by about 1%. When they've had people restrict with high blood pressure, reduced it from 5.5 to 7%. They found that when they sodium restricted, it altered their renin and angiotensin levels, which are part of the kidney, and actually increased their risk of having a cardiovascular event. So they found that while it reduced your blood pressure, it increased your risk of having some sort of cardiovascular problem.
Shit.
So,
okay. So what do we do?
The moral of the story is the people that really do need to watch their salt intake are the ones with high blood pressure and have a kidney disease related issue to that as well. If you can't process the salt in your kidney and you have high blood pressure, sure, absolutely. But if you've got great kidney function and you have a little bit of high blood pressure, most of my patients come to me and they're like, I'm on this medication, my high blood pressure, I can't manage it. They're low on sodium. I'm always putting them on sodium. Their blood pressure usually gets more stable, and oftentimes we have to reduce their medications as well.
And we're not talking sodium on a French fry here.
No, we're not. We're talking about really, really good salt. We're talking about unbleached, non-white salt. So I really like Redmond's real salt. Any of the pink salts are fine, but any of the white table salts, it's been stripped of mineral content, including iodine. So when you take the iodine away from the salt and use chloride, you've increased the sodium concentration. So it will be different in pink salt for sure. And so we're actually seeing a switch now in our culture because a lot of people are getting healthier. They're cooking at home. They're doing more juicing. They're eating more like really good proteins and more plants, which means a lot less salt. So you get high crappy sodium when you eat out, but there's a big shift. And it depends a lot, but yeah, huge difference. I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah. Okay. So I also wanted to know, like, specifically going back to like talking about gut health and explaining to those who don't understand what gut health is, because it's such a big word used these days, but gut health and anxiety and mental health.
Yeah, I've not met somebody with anxiety that didn't have gut issues, meaning gas and bloating, indigestion, loose stool, burping, nausea waves, like, all that kind of stuff. Almost always there's something there. And yes, there's a lot you'll read about like, oh, well, serotonin's made in the gut. Yes, that's true. But most of the serotonin you use comes from the brain. So that's not really the big issue. But the big issue is the microbiome content of the gut. So if you're not producing adequate acids, if you're not releasing adequate enzymes to break down all that stuff, if we're creating dysbiosis of the bacteria and the fungal markers are off, those bacteria are what are responsible to make a lot of your neurotransmitters and a lot of those neuropeptides. The most prominent one being GABA, which is your main inhibitory neurochemical, which calms down the nervous system. It's like slows down your thought loops, helps everything feel pretty steady. So if all that's not happening, then we can't feel good up here. And they've done so much good research on different strains of different bacteria that are directly linked to reducing depression, reducing episodes of mania, reducing anxiety, reducing panic. increasing mood stability, all those kinds of things. So and we're actually more bacteria cells than we are our own cells. So the happier we can make our little bacteria, the happier we're going to be. And they did a study, a bunch of them, which I think a lot of people know right now, but they took the mouse, like these mice or rats, I forget now. But anyways, one very sad one and then one pretty happy one. And they ended up switching, they did a fecal transplant switch with each of them. And the sad mouse became happy and the happy mouse became sad. So it has a lot to do with our microbiome.
Okay, so symptoms of possibly having poor gut health, bloating, burping, farting's healthy, isn't it?
It can be if it's not horribly toxic smelling.
Oh, I got to talk to my husband. Oh.
You're like, babe, I love you, but
no. So,
and then pain, indigestion, cramping, feeling full too early, feeling like food doesn't sit well. I've got a lot of people that will tell me like, I don't like meat. It just it feels gross when I eat it.
mm-hmm.
And so that's why a lot of anorexia nervosa is actually not necessarily always a psychological issue. If people don't have enough zinc, you can't make enzymes. If you can't make enzymes, your body will make you feel repulsed by meat because you can't break it down. And then you'll just feel like, ooh, I don't want it. So a lot of the things we see on both sides, what's common in both anorexia and low zinc levels, we see loss of sense of smell. We see feeling full too early. We see an aversion to meat, and we see low appetite.
Okay. And then since we've already talked about farting, what with gut health, I'll use a correct word, stool. Can you tell if you have poor gut health? We'll just call it poop. It's poop.
Yeah, it is. It is. So what we're looking for is at least having one bowel movement a day. Some people have more, but generally speaking, if you don't have one a day, that is a little concerning. Constipation is very common in our culture because of our food intake. Has a lot to do with the poor mineral content of our diet. We're more mineral deficient than we are vitamin deficient. There's also a lot of research on sodium benzoate, which is a food preservative, and they show that sodium benzoate inhibits your production of leptin and ghrelin levels. And those hunger and satiety hormones, when they don't get released, people don't feel that full, they don't feel that hungry. So processed foods will absolutely affect how well you can eat. And then, of course, we want to make sure the stool is not an odd color, if it's more like pebbles and like hard, or if it's too loose and more watery, it's falling apart, like all those things. And I actually show patients like not real like cartoons, I show them cartoon pictures. And I'm like, which one's yours? Because that will give us a lot of hints on what's actually happening in the digestive tract. Because, it's kind of vague. If someone says, I don't feel good, or I'm tired, cough, my stomach hurts, be 1,000 things. So the more clues could be helpful.
Yeah. Well, on that note, is there anything else you want to share here? I mean, there's so much more you could talk about and all of your different therapies that you use, but anything you want to highlight here for everyone, or tips for anyone to take home, or maybe if they need to go get something checked out or educate?
I'd say I know the basics are super boring. Like, are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? All that kind of stuff. But I think the marker of good health is if you are sleeping well, if you have adequate energy, if you have a bowel movement every day and you have an appetite. If all those are there, decently healthy. But I would say if those things are not in place, then it doesn't have to be your normal. So it's just because you're used to it doesn't mean it's normal. Just because it's common in your family doesn't mean it's normal. So if there's something that's just not good enough and you are worth it, then go down the rabbit hole a little bit. It's never too late to make your life a little bit better. I've got people that have been in withdrawal for years off of psych meds. Mm-hmm. And they're like, is this just the way it is? I damaged my brain. No, you didn't. But body will heal in a way that's easiest, not in a way that's best. It will be on a cascade of maintaining whatever's been going on. So if we want to change that direction, we have to be proactive. Like, time will not heal anything. It's the biggest myth in medicine. So we actually have to be proactive with our health, and then that's when we'll see changes.
So how long, say someone has been on psych meds for a decade, how long will it take to wean off of that and feel good?
So most of my people, I take them off in less than a year. For some people, it can be a little bit shorter or longer. And I always tell people give it about 2 years to recalibrate. And that's because not that you'll feel bad the whole 2 years, but those days where you feel really tapery and awful and withdrawal symptoms, those days will be less intense and less frequent over time. But it's not unusual for maybe 9 months down the road for someone to be like, whoa, I feel like I'm tapering again. That's really weird. And then it'll kind of go away. It just takes a while for things in your body to really let go. And like I had one girl and she's doing sauna therapy. And she actually girl, so she's like 40, but she came out and she's like, I can smell the Hot Topic perfume I wore when I was like a kid. And it was coming out in her sweat because it stays. Like things like that really do stay. So there's a lot of things in psychiatric medications, like fluorides and different, things that are not necessarily healthy for us. So a lot of the drug metabolites will go out. We study the half-life of that, but we don't study the half-life of the synergistic effects, that's toxicology, of the inactive ingredients of our food and our medications, our toothpaste, what we put on our skin. All those things, they can form these like complexes and they can stick around for a long time. So.
Yeah. And again, I think we were talking before this started, some mental illness or mental health conditions, you need medication. And then some you can get weaned off. And there's no right or wrong. It's just making sure you feel your best. But I'm always for trying the all natural first. But and I have a question too. Do you use red light therapy with your clients?
I use a lot of infrared. So we do that. And a lot of people do like different types of light therapy or laser therapies. So it's one of my favorite things to do just because, less invasive.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. A few side effects.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Britz, thank you for this very informative and fun conversation. I will put everything in the show notes on how to find you. And I appreciate it so much for sharing all of this insight with everyone.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so much fun. I can geek about this stuff all day.
I know. All right. Much appreciation.
Likewise. Thanks, Cream.
The big silence. The big silence.